Hello, everyone. I'm Farzan Ahmed with the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. I also serve as the chair of IBTTA's Global Road Safety Committee. Last year, we had our inaugural Road Safety Week at the end of June, the last week of June, and then we decided that this is important enough that we should do it every year. For those of you who participated, last year's theme was Be Safe Together, because it takes all of us working together from different walks of life, from different industries, working together to keep everybody safe on the highway. This year's theme is Be the Highway Hero. People have asked me, what is a highway hero? Well, everybody can be a highway hero. All it takes is for you to be intentional and deliberate when you get behind the wheel. Today, behind this wheel, when I drive my car, I will take the extra effort to be safe for myself, for my family, and for everybody else on the road around me. As I mentioned, it takes all of us to do this and to make an impact. Now, our goal is Vision Zero. We want zero deaths on the highway. And we have a lot of partners in the industry working with us. And one of our partners is from the world of academia. And I'm looking at their website right now. This is the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. I'm going to read the first line. Virginia Tech Transportation Institute conducts research to save lives, time, and money, and protect the environment. That's about as clear as it gets. It's a great message. And I'm very honored that today I have two great people representing the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute with me. Zach Dorzaff, who's the executive director, and Charlie Clower, who's a leading researcher. And first of all, Zach and Charlie, thank you for making time and joining me. I'm going to ask you to ask some questions. Zach, let's start with you.
Sounds great.
You are the director of one of the world's leading research institutes. What drives you? You have a $50 million portfolio. What makes you do this?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, your intro touched on it very effectively. So, I'm truly inspired by a future with safe, effective mobility for everybody. It's extraordinarily unfortunate, and I would say that it ought to be unacceptable for all of society to be okay with 40 to 42,000 people a year dying in the U.S. alone. On top of that, you're looking at worldwide tolls reaching into the millions, and the injuries in the U.S. alone reaching, 2.5 million injuries a year. And these are often life-changing incidents. And fundamentally, that gets me out of bed every morning. I came here to get a degree 24 years ago, and never left, because the job allows me to strive for this incredibly altruistic mission of getting up every day and putting in the hard work in order to improve people's lives by making them get home safe. Nobody should die on the roadway just because they have somewhere they'd like to be. And although most people don't know it, the single most dangerous thing we all like to do every day is turn the key in the ignition in the morning when we leave. And so, transportation ought to be something that we all have and that we know will get to our destination safe. It shouldn't be something that we have to put our lives at risk to benefit from.
That's very well said, Zach. And I never thought about that this is the most dangerous thing that we do every day. We just take it for granted. It's become part of life. And I like that you said it's unacceptable. This is how we have to look at it. Charlie, you're the leading researcher and head of the Applied Driver Assessment Performance and Training Group at VTTI. Particularly, you're working with adolescents and novice drivers. That's got to be a challenge. What drives you? What motivates you?
So there's quite a few things that drive me and motivate me, but one of the things is that really I find unacceptable is that our data and a lot of other data out there really show that teens are at a 4 times heightened crash risk than any other age group, and that's just unacceptable to me. Some of the other data that I find fascinating and that we should be really using and thinking about more seriously is during the learner's permit phase of teen drivers, their fatal crash or their crash rates in general are very, very low, actually quite similar to adult drivers. But as soon as they start driving independently, it spikes to the highest of any other age group. What is happening in that spike, and what are we not teaching our teens during the learner's permit, and what can we pull from the learner's permit to bring those crash rates down once teens are driving independently? And so those are some of the questions and the things that really make me think about research and think about how to better do research to really improve teen driving safety.
It just reminded me of something I used to do when I was teaching my daughter. how to drive many years ago, and she bumped into something very lightly as she was backing up, and I told her, "Get out of the car. I want to talk to you." I said, "You hit nothing." She said, "Yeah, it's no big deal." I said, "It is a big deal because that could have been a person. What you just did is a near miss because you didn't know what you hit. You weren't looking. You weren't paying attention. This could have been a person." And I think that message to teams is very important for us to deliver.
Mhm.
Zach, VTTI's work spans everything from vehicle automation to advanced driver assistance systems. Can you share some examples of how your research and field trials are directly advancing life-saving solutions in real-world scenarios?
Yeah, I sure can. I sure can. And well, I could even expand the scope a little bit and say, there's also some of the lower tech stuff we're doing. So why don't I start with that? One example in just recently here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you live in this part of the world, you might have noticed that state police cruisers have different colored lights than they used to because we did some work looking at just the conspicuity of different lighting patterns and different lighting systems on emergency vehicles, and found that the addition of red light to the traditional blue light is significantly more visible. So, to your point, being a highway hero, being on the road as an individual, one of the things that we lean into is acknowledging that humans are fallible even when they're behind the driver wheel, and anything we can do to assist them. For example, getting to see a police cruiser an extra 100 or 200 feet down the road because we've selected a better lighting pattern, that's something that we're excited about. And it's a great example of a technology that seems really simple, but that makes a meaningful difference today on the roadway as these systems are in full deployment now and working their way, starting in the U.S. or starting, sorry, in the Commonwealth, but really spreading across the country now, thanks to the positive outcomes that we're seeing both in the testing into deployment and now post-deployment, that it's a more effective system. Then moving kind of down that spectrum towards, let's say, more exciting, higher technology solutions. And the reason I say that is because one of the really cool things that's presently happening is the proliferation of this new technologies, things like artificial intelligence, advanced sensing with LiDAR and new radar systems. You've got unprecedented computing power. Our cars are effectively moving computers these days with up to millions of lines of code sitting there, in and around us. What that technology is allowing us to do is really open up an entirely new toolbox into enhancing safety in the vehicle by taking what was traditionally a human-driven responsibility of driving and moving towards a shared driving sort of system where the human is largely in charge of driving, but they've got like some silent helpers behind them. So another example that I'm super excited about because it's becoming common enough to really see its effect in the real world is automatic electronic braking, or AEB as it's often called. These systems are on virtually every new car now and are going to be mandated shortly, and will truly be on every new car based on the work done at VTTI and other research organizations similar to ours that represent a huge body of effort that allowed us to augment the human when we get ourselves or conditions occur that puts us into a crash likely situation, that now the car is going to apply the brakes for us. What's really neat about that is humans are, as well as we think we can brake hard, we're often not as effective as we could be. So these systems will go straight to the full capabilities of the vehicle. They will brake at the last possible instant and largely avoid, if not mitigate, a collision, whether that's with vehicles, infrastructure, and to an increasing degree, pedestrians. That to me is extraordinarily exciting example of both of the work that's done here and really the promise of technology, because we can take what was a single driver and effectively add additional drivers into that layer that can help improve the envelope. Now, if we pull that a little bit further down that spectrum of technological solutions, another program that I'm very excited about that is in the early stages of test deployment is with automated truck-mounted attenuators. So this may be of a particular interest to your members who have, tend to be road operators or involved in the operation of a facility. And those, of course, sooner or later, you have road work to do. And one of the ways we keep our road workers safe is through these truck-mounted attenuators. Well, turns out those attenuators are struck and unfortunate frequently. In fact, if you get a group of the drivers together, they almost always have a war story that either they themselves have experienced or a colleague where it's been struck, while they're in the vehicle. So we're effectively making humans crash test dummies in these vehicles. So one of the great opportunities is to take that driver out and make that vehicle automated. And we've been working with a good set of partners at DCS and the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as some other places, in order to build this relatively simple automated solution because it operates at a lower speed. It's slightly off of the roadway. We can use a leader follower technology instead of a pure full automation technology. But that allows us to extract the driver from the vehicle at risk and place the driver, or operator is a better term, into a leading vehicle where they're simply monitoring the system to be sure that it's performing safely while it's driving on the side of the road, taking the driver completely out of it. So now you have safe road workers without somebody who's sitting inside of that ATMA or TMA truck. So I think that's super exciting. And then, of course, if we go a little bit further into the full automation space, we're partners with a number of the full-scale providers that are out there, doing it in commercial revenue driving sort of scenarios. Also, we tend to do a lot of work with vehicle manufacturers and technology providers to enable those automated systems and look at a variety of interesting research questions on how we ensure that as we enter this sort of brave new world where there is no human driver, that those automated systems are acting in the best interest of the humans. Because ultimately, it's great that we can create robots, but those robots need to serve us. And the first job they should have as drivers is to ensure that the people in and around the vehicle are kept safe at all times.
Really happy to hear about the automated truck-mounted attenuators. Those attenuators are sacrificial. They do get hit, and it's typically the person driving that gets some sort of a jolt. Fortunately, we've not had too many people get badly injured, but they have been tossed around. And if we can avoid that, that would be a wonderful thing to keep people safe. I appreciate that information. Charlie, your work has focused extensively on naturalistic driving studies, including teens and drivers with developmental differences. What have you learned from these studies that you think is most critical for improving road safety for these vulnerable groups?
So yeah, we have studied teen drivers fairly extensively using naturalistic data techniques. And by naturalistic driving, what we mean is we have instrumented teens' private vehicles with cameras and data acquisition systems. So we know exactly how fast they're going, how hard they're braking, how hard they're cornering, and as well as what they're doing behind the wheel in various types of different traffic environments. And we use these data to really assess the risks that are facing teen drivers and how they react to them. Some of the things that we've learned are that teen drivers actually engage in what we call kinematic risky driving behaviors about 4 times to 6 times more frequently than adult drivers do. And this is hard braking events, hard cornering, and speeding above the speed limit. And these types of activities not only reduce the amount of time that a teen could respond to a surprise event, but it also makes them less predictable to all of the vehicles around them. And so we have seen that these types of behaviors actually increase their crash and near crash occurrence. Driver distraction is another big one. I have done several analyses where it shows very specifically that a lot of different secondary tasks that are done by drivers of all ages increase crash near crash risk for teen drivers, but not for drivers of all ages. And that includes not only interacting with the center stack or HVAC systems, but also eating and engaging with passengers. Engaging with passengers increases risk for teen drivers only. It does not really increase risk for adults and adult drivers, as we have seen. Most recently, we have also learned some very interesting things about supervised practice driving and the importance of that practice. One of our latest analyses have shown that those teens who actually got more practice with an adult behind the wheel had lower crash near crash rates.
We visited back in December. Tech announced that it will increase student fees and direct a portion to it.
Holy moly. Sorry, Charlie.
No worries. Okay, I'm going to back up, start over again.
Like to center of the talk.
Okay, one of the analyses that we have done recently looking at supervised practice driving is that teens who got more practice during the learner's permit timeframe had much lower crash near crash rates than teens that did not get as much practice. And so parents really need to spend that time and be practicing with their teen so that they can learn not only key driving skills, but also getting experience in a variety of different roadway environments, traffic environments, weather, lighting, nighttime, daytime, etc. Those are all really important things that keep teen drivers safe once they start driving independently.
Right. Experience. That's, yeah, I think getting them more experience behind the wheel. And of course, when they're new drivers and fresh drivers, they don't quite have the experience that more seasoned drivers have.
Yes.
Zach, as countries look to take bold actions in line with Global Road Safety Week, the practical insights, innovative strategies from VTTI's work, what do you think have the greatest potential for immediate impact?
Great question. I mean, one thing to do is always start with why. Look at be sure you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. I think sometimes, especially around technology, people get excited and start putting in without starting from the question of why. So very important to use a data-driven approach to looking at the challenge that you're most interested in solving on your roadway or in the vehicle, and then applying the appropriate data-driven techniques to researching and the challenge itself so that you understand it before you start to devise and implement solutions. We see that a fair amount in the research space. Often, it feels like we're kind of marching ahead faster than maybe the outcomes are known, and we see it incumbent upon us to get that information out there. So if you're an implementer, look for the outcomes coming out of the research and make sure that you're leveraging that knowledge, because our job is to help you all as practitioners make better decisions on what makes it out into the roadway, and certainly seeing our work should be part of that. You mentioned Vision Zero too, so I'll give a little plug to the US DOT's focus on a safe systems approach in the US. I think that's a good framework and something that as a practitioner or a researcher, it is a good framework to look at, because it points out things like what the major challenges are with regard to what it is that is impacting safety, and then is very inclusive in terms of recognizing all of the various parts of the system and the people in it that have responsibilities towards ensuring safety. So you can look at sort of the overall problem before diving into the details on a given treatment or solution that you intend to put in to fix a challenge. And that way you make sure you're not, tunnel visioned into a small solution and not considering the broader context that it's in. And I believe that if you take that more systems level holistic approach, the likelihood of making a meaningful impact successfully is considerably higher.
Do you have any advice for either vendors or for tool system operators like myself? The vendors are bringing these technology, and then of course we have to adopt this technology. How do we bring that together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think be collaborative. You're absolutely right. A lot of the time I think we get in these procurement situations where we're slinging RFPs over the fence and looking at responses coming back, and sometimes we're losing the details. So do your homework ahead of time before you get to that procurement phase to be sure you're right sizing the opportunity so that the vendors are going to produce what it is that you actually need to make a positive impact. I think that is super important in the process. So yeah, collaborate. But in addition to that, vendors are super well-meaning. They understand their technologies well, but your applications can be unique. So don't hesitate to build in verification and validation sort of steps within the procurement. Don't go straight to scale without making sure you take the time to ensure that it's working, in a smaller. So think of the classic crawl, walk, run. Take a look. Spend a little bit of money, making sure it works well, go the next step in a second phase, and then finally in a third phase, you can make that big investment where you'll see the real meaningful impacts.
Great advice. Goes back to answering that first thing you said, why. Got to answer that why first. Okay. Charlie, distraction and fatigue are still major contributors to crashes, especially for younger and novice drivers, people that you've been researching and working with. Mm-hmm. Can you share some of the most surprising findings from your research and what they reveal about how drivers interact with those risks?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that we have discovered, and because I've been involved in this series of naturalistic studies over the past 15 years or so, one of the things that we have been able to observe is as technology, as our cell phones become more and more capable, how has that been impacting driving safety? And scarily and sadly, the cell phones we have today are so much more capable and so much more dangerous, actually, than the flip phones of the early 2000s. So what we're seeing right now is very dangerous behaviors that teens and drivers of all ages, but teens in particular, are engaging in, that require that they must look away, they must be physically manipulating that phone, and those activities take their attention completely away from the forward roadway and thus increase risk. So we're just seeing more and more of those types of interactions and more of those dangerous interactions. We really need to be thinking about much more carefully how to keep teens' attention on the forward roadway, and what technologies and what systems can we use to do that. And I think there are several things. Thinking back to one of the statements I made earlier is how do we learn from the learner's permit phase and reduce fatal crashes and near crashes during independent driving? Well, one of those ways is to try to bring that parent back virtually, at least, to the passenger seat in the vehicle. And one of those ways we can do that is there's a lot of cell phone apps out there that parents can actually monitor their teen driving while they're out driving independently, but yet they can still see when they're speeding, at what locations, how hard they're braking, whether they're interacting with their cell phone. And if parents could use some of those monitoring techniques to continue to monitor and observe their teen and help them learn and coach them through those early years of independent driving, I think parents could improve their teen driving safety.
That is great advice. And I heard about that yesterday from somebody about the cell phone apps, and I was not aware of them. I would go one step further. I would say parents should download those apps for themselves and then set the example. That it's not
Absolutely.
about the fact that I've been driving for 40 years. It's about the fact that, as Zach said earlier, driving is an extremely dangerous thing to do. And as you said, Charlie, the cell phones have so many things going on. There's so many capabilities. It's easy to get distracted. So let's set the example. And I'm going to have it. And hey, I want you to have it too. And I want to make sure that you stay alive. I think that message would be a strong message from the
It
parent.
would very much so, yes.
That emerging vehicle technologies and intelligent transportation systems offer tremendous potential, but adoption can be challenging. Part of it is just, of course, cars on the road for a long time. But what barriers, what obstacles do you see, and how can we collectively overcome them to ensure that these solutions make a difference?
That's a great question. And you're right, cars are on the road for a long time, but it's even longer, the roads. So one of the challenges, big physical infrastructure is very expensive, and preparing it for the future can be a challenge. So certainly on the infrastructure side, trying to future-proof, thinking about things like extra conduit or communication backbones and that sort of thing. That's, those are good investments to help future-proof where things are tending to head. Now, we have some really big barriers, particularly in the space of connected vehicles, which I think is this huge opportunity, both for human-driven, but also as we move towards increasingly robotic-driven vehicles and associated systems. The opportunity to share data directly between vehicles, infrastructure, and other types of road users is an incredible opportunity to prove not just safety, but really the mobility in general. The challenge there is and has been and continues to be really down to interoperability. The problems are becoming solved in some ways, and we have to be careful here because connectivity comes in many flavors, and we're seeing a great proliferation of deployed connected technologies that are using traditional data backbones like cellular, for example. And we can go a long way with those. A lot of apps available on phones these days. Vehicles are often connected. That's doing a great job giving travelers more information about what's ahead on the roadway. I'm excited about those kind of applications, particularly as they get more dynamic. So you can say, not just there's a road work ahead, but there's road work ahead, workers on the roadway, move over 2 lanes. And yes, we can get that level of information to drivers. I believe we have some pretty amazing opportunities. And while there are interoperability challenges and standardized challenges and privacy challenges remaining to really bring those to fruition, I can see clearly how we get there. Where it becomes really challenging and where some of the even greater opportunities are in that low latency point-to-point communication. We've had some starts and stops with technology, from dedicated short-range communication to where we are today with cellular V2X. And I believe strongly we're at a point where all of the technology is plenty mature. We just, as an industry, as a community, and as regulators, need to come together to form a solid consensus, chart a pathway forward, and really make it happen. In the absence of that kind of national framework that'll drive us in a particular direction for connectivity and also for things like automation, the best way that folks like your members can start to make real progress is by deploying systems that they can control both sides of, for example. So if you have a fleet of vehicles that you're operating on your roadway, then maybe those are a good opportunity to deploy some connected solutions and start to benefit from those techniques while we wait essentially for the broader community to adopt consistent platforms. And certainly where you can, adopting the platforms that are out there and existing and helping to drive the motivation to continue to deploy those. And again, there's a number of apps, whether that's Google and Waze and those that you can publish data to now, and users of those apps will get that connected information. So I would certainly say that if you have the data already to push to those kind of apps, just take the extra steps and get it out there so you're starting to make a difference now rather than later, and then build your longer term roadmap based on the systems that are still kind of coming to consensus and being deployed. But yeah, be part of that community, make it happen. It's not going to happen if we don't take some risk joining together and push the technologies out there.
The advice about using the fleet to test some of these systems, ultimately it's about getting the right information to the right people so that they can make the decisions they need to make to keep everybody else safe. I like that. But the question that comes to mind, and that's something that somebody needs to discuss and focus on at some point. We think we know what the vehicle of the future looks like. Do we know what the road of the future looks like? And I think that's still, there's a bit of a gap there that we have to. You mentioned roads, that more than the vehicle is the road. Well, yeah, the roads have been there the designs are still the same, and perhaps those designs stay the same. But is there something else we need to do to the road down the road, no pun intended, so that connectivity can be facilitated? I guess that's something we have to tackle together as well. Charlie, I'm going to give you the last word. And, you talked about this a little bit when you talked about the apps and about getting the parents back to see how the teens are doing after better training. But, there have been a lot of advances in technology. Have there been advances in driver education? What do you think is the greatest promise that we have right now available to us for addressing distraction? And how do we encourage the adoption of that promise?
So I think there are various aspects or various technologies that can really improve distraction and keep our teens safe. Some are what I would call low-hanging fruit, and some are a little bit more complex. One of the things that I have implemented on my phone and my family's phones is the concept of the do not disturb function, which basically shuts down all notifications while you are driving. When the phone senses that it's in motion, it won't allow text messages and phone calls and other things to come through and notify you. And those technologies can be set up so that if you want to know if your husband or your spouse or your child is trying to get a hold of you, those can come through, but everything else will be suppressed. And these are great technologies, a great system to just kind of help you keep your attention focused on the forward roadway versus on your phone. Very simple. But some of the technologies that Zach talked about that are on board the vehicles are also really important. Automatic emergency braking is an amazing technology that actually would benefit teen drivers significantly. There are other technologies coming on board, including driver monitoring systems that will actually alert the driver when they've been looking away too long. And some of those systems could be used and better utilized for teen drivers specifically, to really improve getting the drivers back, getting their attention back to the forward roadway. That's a little bit further out, but it's certainly coming. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety also publishes every single year a list of vehicles that they believe are safe for teen drivers, both new vehicles and used vehicles. And that's an excellent tool for parents to really see what technologies are on board these vehicles and what can really help keep their teens safe. And so a lot of those technologies really can improve safety for teen drivers, and parents should take a look at that when they're considering what vehicles to buy for their teens. As I mentioned before, the driver monitoring apps that really help and kind of bring the parents kind of back into the driver's seat again, those are outstanding, and parents should really try to use those to help continue to coach their teen to drive. But some of the simple things are really keep riding with your teen. Not only make sure they get lots of practice, but once your teen gets their independent license, continue to ride with them. Our data have shown that parents largely do not ride with their teen anymore. And that is a missed opportunity. Your teen does not know everything. They still have a lot of questions. And certainly when they're driving in environments they haven't driven before, get back in that passenger seat, ride with them, continue to help coach, continue to help monitor, and give them advice on how to really drive safely. Yes, they complain, and yes, there's some hard conversations to have sometimes, but all that aside, it is still really important to be riding with your teen and making sure that they have the information and the experience they need to make safe decisions.
You're talking about intentional behavior by teens and parents, and you are an expert when it comes to behavior and driving. So I'm going to ask you a question that might put you on the spot. We have heard about so much technology. Zach has talked about it. You've talked about it. And so much technology that's available to us. Is that ever a substitute for vigilance and intentional behavior?
No. And especially for teen drivers. Teens are notoriously not very good at detecting hazards on the roadway, either obvious hazards or what we call latent hazards, which are, things hidden behind some visual obstacle or something hidden behind a traffic that's existing there, where they really need to understand where vehicles could potentially be, even though they can't see them right now, that could impact their decisions. Teens are not very good at that. They are still learning that. And the only way that they're going to learn that more quickly and more safely is if they're looking forward. It's really, really important for teens to be paying attention and to be as vigilant and attentive as possible while they're learning, especially in those early months of driving. We just recently completed an analysis looking at eyes off road time for teen drivers, and risks of eyes off road, even very short durations, is much higher in the first 6 months than it is in later independent driving. And so the importance of this just cannot be underscored.
Charlie, really appreciated your time. You guys are doing such wonderful work up at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, and your work is indeed saving lives. And thank you so much for sharing your time and all the information with me. And I'm so happy to see both of you and your organization are now getting involved with IBTTA. I think we need to collaborate more. I think there's much we can learn from you. There's much we can learn from each other, and there's much we can do together to promote safety. So it's about intentional behavior, intentional work that both of you do. Both of you are the types of highway heroes that we are trying to promote and we are trying to recognize. Thank you so much for being the highway heroes with the work that you do. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yep. Pleasure. Thanks a lot for having us.